This meeting is now being recorded.
All right. So you all have the agenda. Mark Holmes became ill in Vegas, and I'm glad that you nor I came home with that infliction, but my wife did. So she's desperately trying to pass it along to me so she can get rid of it. But Pam has volunteered to provide a presentation that she did at the Finance Committee meeting, right?
Long-term augmentation.
Oh, Marines Committee. So, Pam, take it away, please.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pam Muse. I work in the Planning and Data Management section of the Department of Water Resources. I see a couple familiar faces, but most of you I don't know. So to give you a quick little background, I've been with the department since the beginning of the implementation of its first management plan in the active management areas. Worked on the development of the second and third, and I'm currently working on the fourth management plan. I worked on the basin study, assisted with that, and I worked on the Governor's Water Augmentation Committee, providing information mostly on the municipal side of things, population projections, but also assisted with demand. And I was asked to give this presentation to the Long-Term Augmentation Committee on how I've been working on developing projections. Most of this presentation is at a pretty basic, general level, and I'm not going to go through every slide. I see you have quite an agenda and only an hour. I'm going to focus mostly on the municipal stuff, but I believe this presentation has been posted to the website. And if anyone has any questions, my contact information is at the end. If you think of things later on, you can just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. So I think most people know that projections are not predictions. It's just kind of a what-if scenario. And depending on the details that you use for your what-ifs and the data that goes into your assumptions, your projections are only going to be as good as the information that goes into them. It's nice to have ranges, to kind of bracket and then understand that what's going to happen should usually fall within the middle. But your assumptions should always pass a reasonableness test. We also call it the straight face test. If you tell people your assumptions and they laugh, that's not really a good thing. But hopefully you should adjust your assumptions after that. The relationships between the data pieces and parts in the projections are really important. For example, we know that the number of schools and parks generally increases with the population, and identifying all of those relationships can be key to developing projections that are meaningful. Another important thing in developing projections is how detailed it's important for you to be for your purpose. That's why I have the little tree versus the leaf. It depends how important and what you're going to use them for, how you break those down. Also, the future isn't necessarily going to be the same as the past. I like that quote at the bottom. I don't know if Yogi Bear actually said that, but the future ain't what it used to be. For example, we know that people can't buy the same kind of plumbing fixtures now that were available in the 80s. You just can't get those anymore, so you can't assume that trend will continue. So for what I do, I generally start with population, and it's important to note that the population projections that were used in the WRDC and the Water Resource Development Commission came out during the height of our economic growth when it was at its peak. So those projections were really quite high. In 2013 and 2015, the Arizona Office of Employment and Population, that's that acronym, AOEP, that's the same unit that used to be in DES. Now they're in the Office of Administration. They came out with two more sets of projections, but those are based on the 2010 census, which was low. So the current projections that we have from the state are much lower than the ones that came out in 2006. And just so that you know, the ones that they came out with first in 2013 are actually a little bit higher than the most current ones. So, a lot of people want to use gallons per capita per day, GPCD, or gallons per housing unit per day to do municipal projections. But it's important to note that I call them pitfalls, things to be aware of. For example, you can't buy the same plumbing fixtures anymore. There is conservation ethic in certain service areas. People are ripping out their turf. You don't know to the degree to which that is going to continue. Landscaping in new subdivisions is very different than in older subdivisions. You can see in the chart that I have here, this is statewide numbers, that as the demand has been kind of flat and the GPCD has actually been going down in recent years. So other things to consider in developing municipal water demand projections is what kind of water service area it is. I think it's really important to look at each individual service area. Some are older, some are all brand new, some are seasonal, and depending on the landscaping, if it's a golf course community or not, the water use per home, per person can be very different. Another thing that's very difficult that we're hoping to do some more studies on, and I'm constantly looking for studies, is the non-residential component of municipal demand. There is a sense that there is also conservation in the non-residential sector, that, you know, people who do manufacturing are using lower water using machines, and restaurants are using less water, but we don't really have a good handle on that. There's so many different kinds of non-residential uses, it's really hard to get a handle on that. Also, water loss. There's certain service areas that have quite old infrastructure and they have a very high water loss. Do we think that's going to continue? Hopefully not, but that's a component too of the water that comes out of the ground, the water that has to be produced to meet the needs. The loss is a component of that. And then, of course, private well uses. We call them exempt wells in the Department of Water Resources. Small private wells are not regulated. They don't have to report to us. And their uses could be anything from a very large lot with an acre or so of pasture to a mobile home on dirt. So there's a lot of different uses for private wells. For the fourth management plan, we started with population projections at the traffic analysis zone level, and that's what those kind of pinkish lines are on this map with the Phoenix active management area boundary on top of it. And we broke those projections down to individual municipal providers, to small providers, and then the remainder of the total AMA population was for exempt wells. And we looked at the water use history, the water portfolios of every individual water provider, and other information that we had that helped us determine their water supply priority. For example, are they going to focus on use of surface water and then only use groundwater when they have to? Are they going to ramp up their use of their Central Arizona project water over time? Are they going to store the water underground and recover it or treat it directly at a water treatment plant? So we came up with an individual projection for each water provider. The small provider assumptions varied by active management area, but we generally used trend lines unless we had specific information for a small provider that we knew they were going to grow a lot. For example, a small provider for whom many certificates of assured water supply had been issued, and in whose traffic analysis zone there's a lot of projected population. Most small municipal providers in the 5 active management areas are on groundwater. There's a few that don't, but they're almost entirely groundwater. For exempt wells, we didn't have a lot of information other than the population for them. So what we assumed in the fourth management plan was that an exempt well was the same thing as a single-family home, and that the growth in exempt wells, that they could only buy the low-energy plumbing fixtures, and that their landscapes were going to look similar to a single-family home. We had to assume something. It's not the best, but they vary so much. That's what we have in there. 2 of the active management areas have water providers who deliver flood irrigation for urban landscape, and so we projected those basically remaining the same amount and the same historical mix of supplies. So for the industrial sector, what we call industrial in the active management areas is almost the same thing as what the USGS refers to as self-supplied industrial. This is an industrial use like a power plant, a mine, a dairy, a feedlot, a golf course that has its own well or its own source of supply. It's not getting water from a municipal water provider. And these entities, we projected each subsector of the industrial individually. So we have a projection for mines, we have a projection for dairy, we have a projection for power. And we kind of broke it down by the unit. So a unit would be different depending on the subsector. For dairy, the unit would be the number of cows. So we have a projection for the number of cows. For power plants, it would be the number of megawatts that the power plant is projected to generate. Although with power, it's difficult because the power plants are kind of changing over time away from the steam electric and more towards the combustion, and there's solar plants out there, so it's also tricky. Another thing that's tricky about power is not all the power that's generated in the state is used in the state, so you can't really directly tie it to our population growth. And so then there's also some other, we have an other category of industrial that could be anything. It could be a factory, it could be, a nursery, and so those are very difficult to project too. Again, they differed by AMA and by the subsector. We generally use trend lines, and we looked at the historical supply portfolio, and for some instances, if we had specific information on a source of supply that sector used, like reclaimed water, for example, we would have parsed that out and then assumed that the other supplies remained fairly constant. Agricultural demand is very difficult to project because of the fluctuating agricultural economy. I have a chart there showing the acres in certain crops, and some of the major crops in Arizona. And you can see cotton kind of has a trend going down. That's kind of the yellowish line on the chart. And you can see hay is increasing, and there's other crops that just really fluctuate with the economy. So there's things to consider. Is the farmer farming wall to wall, or some of his fields fallow? Have the crop types changed over time? Are they double cropping? What kind of irrigation system are they using, and is weather a concern? And then other questions outside of AMAs. Of course, inside AMAs, agriculture cannot expand, but outside AMAs, how much can it expand? Are there any limitations by the canal systems or other infrastructure limitations? Are there any limitations to the agricultural economy based on depth to water? When we were talking to the districts in active management areas, some of the districts told us it's not affordable for them to pump below a certain depth. So if they don't have CAP water and, the groundwater hits that depth, they might, close their doors, or at least limit the amount that they deliver. There's other limitations too, the cost of materials and supplies and economic factors that we can't really get a good handle on because they fluctuate so much. So this is a long laundry list, and I won't go through it all, but all of the things that we kind of looked at inside the active management areas for the agricultural assumptions. We looked at districts. We looked at the availability of the CAP agricultural pool. We looked at the recharge permits. Some of those have permit limits on them, canal capacity, financial restrictions, and a review of the historical supplies used. Tribal was also difficult. Tribal agricultural demand was difficult for us to project because we have so little information. We have good data from the Central Arizona Project for those farmers that use that water for their agricultural purposes. We had some information from settlement agreements, and we just had some, hey, I heard they're going to do this. So it would be great to have better information for tribal, but essentially I believe that all of the AMAs that have tribal agriculture, we have assumed that it will increase over time. And then what I do is normally I come up with the projected demand first, and then I go back and I find the supplies to meet that demand. And so then you have to look at each supply and consider whether there's any limitations on that supply, and will that limitation on the supply make me have to circle back and change the demand assumption. Groundwater, I talked to depth to water, water quality, and then we've got Colorado River water, CAP water, and other surface water. And then, of course, we also have reclaimed water. Is reclaimed water being reused in any sector right now? Are there reclaim systems in place? Will those expand? Is it going to be recharged? What are they going to do with that water? So kind of in some, there's sort of a laundry list of questions that I ask myself when I'm developing the projections. Are there any legal constraints to the supply? Can they store the water? Is importation an option? How much? When? Are water exchanges an option? And how might the water supplies change over time? And then for the active management areas, there were other things that we had to take into consideration, including, the availability of CAP water, how much water is going to be stored underground and recovered, what is the water bank going to be doing in the future, and what are the obligations going to be for the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District and assumptions for that. Will there be any unused CAP in each projection year, and who will use that? So I'm almost at the end here, and I have a couple of slides. I want to show you the difference that different assumptions can have in your final numbers. So these numbers are from the water assessments that the department developed in advance of developing the fourth management plan, and these were based on historical data through 2006. And so this is for the year 2005. This is the 2025 projection. And you can see the water demands by sector, and then the red numbers are the overdraft that we projected in 2025 for each of the active management areas. Santa Cruz AMA is not shown here because I haven't completed developing the projections for the 4MP for Santa Cruz. So, for example, to see how things change, focus on Tucson AMA, which has about 70,000 acre-feet of overdraft projected in 2025, and Prescott, it's kind of hard to see. It's about 24,000 acre-feet of overdraft in 2025. And so here's the fourth management plan assumptions. Tucson is actually in a surplus of about 16,000 acre-feet, and Prescott's down to about 6,500 acre-feet. So that's population, that's changing to renewable supplies, and changes in agricultural assumptions, and all the other sectors too. So I'll go back so you can see it again. So there's Tucson and Prescott, and here's where we're at now. So things can really change depending on your assumptions that go in your projections. So I did a really, really quick, and I'm talking, back of an envelope on the bus ride into work kind of projection, using those new population projections from the state for 2015, and using data that the department has from 1991 through the present from the USGS for all the non-AMA basins in the state. And using that information, I developed some really, really quick, really rough, it says back of the envelope projections up there, but just comparing what the Water Resource Development Commission had projected for 2035 and using the 91 through 2015 information from the USGS and the AMAs and those new population numbers, how those numbers would be different. And so you can see on the far right, it's about 1.3 million acre-feet of demand less than the WRDC. But I don't want anyone to say that these back-of-the-envelope numbers, that's why it says back-of-the-envelope, are in any way official projections from the Department of Water Resources. This is Pam, fiddling with numbers in her cubicle. But just to give you an idea of how things can change with the new population projections. I'm currently in the process of extending those out to 2060 and refining them so that they're a little bit more realistic and have a few more components to them. But they're less than in the WRDC. And this is that same information but on a graph. So you can see WRDC 2035, and then now with the new numbers. It's hard to see the difference on this chart, but you do see some of the lines going down. So that's it on my presentation. If there's any questions, I'll take them now, or you can always email me. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Are there any questions? Philip?
Where are we currently at? How many million acre-feet per year?
I only have a number for the whole entire state that comes to my mind quickly, and we've been pretty flat at about 7 million acre-feet for the past 3 or 4 years as a whole state.
So we'll go from 7 to 9.1 by 2035.
35, that's what that's saying, yeah. Maybe not.
How many years have we been at 7 million? That seems like a number that's... About
3 or 4. We've really been stuck there for a while, so I guess that's a good thing. There's been so many changes in agriculture and the kinds of crops grown, a lot of switching from cotton to hay. Agriculture is a big driver of that, and also that we're still rebounding from 2010, and growth has been less, and also there's a lot of conservation going on, a lot of conservation in all the water use sectors. So we're doing more with less, which is really good. Okay.
You had a slide that talked about projected overdraft, and it looked like Phoenix dropped off. Is that because the overdraft went to 0?
No, the reason Phoenix dropped off is that our hydrology division is still developing an updated model for the Phoenix AMA, so I don't have the hydrologic pieces to compare to the demand. We don't think it's going to be a lot different, though.
Yeah, it didn't drop off. It's just absent.
Right. Yeah.
Very good.
Right.
I noticed a lot of the information you presented focused on the management plans, so obviously the AMAs. Has the department done similar assumptions and similar analysis for the planning areas, or is that, I guess I'm trying to get a feel for, differences between analysis within the AMAs and the planning area process, if any?
Incredibly differences between the analysis and the planning areas and the AMAs, and that's most notably because we don't have data outside of the AMAs. So that's part of what we're moving through in the planning area process, but we're only working on 3 right now. And we do see significant differences in the 3 planning areas that we're working at in the data the demand data that we're developing versus what was developed by the WRDC.
Okay.
So, that was part of the request, I believe, that Maureen's group was getting to is what does this data as a whole look like different from the picture that we thought we had? And so that's why Pam did the back of the envelope, but she did include the updated did you include the updated for the 3 planning areas?
I don't have the numbers.
You don't have that? Yeah. We weren't able to do that
It's just based on what the USGS is reporting.
Yeah. So, and then that's why the request was made for Pam to see if she could push it out to the next stage of the WRDC, which was the 2060. So,
once the subsector data from the current planning areas is put together and verified, then that will also be able to be part of Pam's projections with updated baseline data for those planning areas. We're just not quite all together on the subsector demand yet.
And just in general, they're the 3 areas that are having issues. That's why we're there. And so the big difference is there's been a significant increase in the agricultural supply. And I know I'm going to get them confused. In one of them, actually, industrial went down. But, and in general, the municipal demand has gone down in most of them just because those were based on the old census. The WRDC data was based on the higher census.
Pam, do you know what the top of your head total demand of all the AMAs are?
I want to say that the AMAs are around 50% of the total statewide.
So about 3.5 million acre feet is used in the AMAs.
Yeah, that is totally off the top of my head.
That's okay. I won't hold you to it.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is this material will be on the posted?
I believe this presentation has already been posted because I gave it last Friday too.
Still waiting for summary approval.
I have a follow-up.
Go ahead.
The overdraft you project for 2025 is 300,000 plus or minus, or 323 or something. I think that's what it said on there.
Okay.
323.
That was from the assessment. That's not the current number yet.
Okay, what is the current projection?
We don't have it.
But I think you said you don't expect it to be substantially different.
Probably won't be that much different.
Given that we supposedly are to achieve safe yield by 2025, what is the 4th management plan going to do to address that? Obviously, safe yield and 300,000 don't work out. Is there any thinking regarding the 4th management plan as to how you're going to address that?
In the Phoenix AMA, we haven't yet started having those conversations with the Groundwater Users Advisory Committee in the Phoenix AMA. The 4th management plan for the Prescott AMA and the Tucson AMA have been adopted, and those plans didn't have a lot of changes from the 3rd management plan, but we haven't yet started talking to the GOAC and Phoenix AMA, so we're not sure what's going to happen there.
I would say it's premature to comment on anything associated with the Phoenix AMA 4MP, just because those discussions haven't started.
Were there any things that we changed in the other AMAs very significantly that to move them closer to safe yield?
The changes that were made in the 4th management plan for Prescott and Tucson were we changed the municipal conservation program to be less cumbersome. We tweaked the requirement for irrigation district lost and unaccounted for water. And then we changed the power plant conservation program to include the combustion, separate component for combustion turbine from steam electric. And I think those were the major programmatic changes that we made. However, we really updated Chapter 12 of the management plans that talk about our challenges for the future. And the Chapter 8, which is the augmentation chapter, included a lot more information on the water bank and what the water bank might do to help the AMAs move forward in the future.
When you just quickly go through the numbers, I mean, all the AMAs are roughly between 10 and 15%. Their total demand, or the total demand in the overdraft, if you just scan through them. So they're not, I mean, they're all kind of in the same range, is I guess what I'm looking at. So, I mean, anything you would impose on one AMA would probably, some differences, but would impact the other ones. So, challenges ahead. I guess that's what part of this group's task is, right? Thanks, Pam.
Thank you.
I would have one comment, which is the improvement in both municipal, industrial, and agricultural efficiency is really encouraging when we contemplate investments on the order of hundreds of millions or billions of dollars into treatment infrastructure, whether it's advanced treatment for reuse and recycling or desal. It's helpful that when we make those investments, we have folks who are going to use the water as efficiently as possible. So it makes the case for those investments easier to make when you're sharing that folks have maybe pulled all the low-hanging fruit out of the efficiency box or the efficiency tree. Conservation is gone as
limited.
It's limited.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, thanks. The big challenge is when we have a wet year like this year, that people don't lose sight of we still live in a desert. We probably won't become a tropical rainforest anytime soon. So the challenges will always be in front of us. Okay, fine, be that way. Did you have comments on the timeline that you could share real quick? Yes. Can you pull up the timeline? I know we were going to go through our other thing, but I saw Chuck making notes on the timeline, and so Philip and I got together, put a straw man together only for something to kind of talk to and jumpstart us. So, Chuck.
Sure.
Can you zoom in?
Looking for a way to do that. It's weird.
I apologize. When I was putting this together, I was zoomed in on the computer. It doesn't print out it nearly as well as.
So when I look at this, it is a very practical timeline. 10 years, basically 10 years to go from concept through commissioning. There are, and it pretty much plays end to end, a serial approach. There are ways, if there was will, to accelerate a program, and that's what my notes were about. Really is, if you'll indulge me.
Yeah.
terms, what we've learned with the analysis we've done to date is 2018 would be the point at which, if there was a clear, I'll just use the term winner, or a high priority recommendation, whatever. 2018 would be the time to start pilot testing, site characterization, both for water quality and in this timeline, if you had good characterization, good data, you could potentially, it's not where I would compress work, pilot testing for a year with skids, testing different treatment trains, whether they're membranes or pre or post balancing. You don't want to shortcut that because you're going to live with it. Bob knows a lot more about that than I do.
Forever.
But exactly. But here in the design, permitting, regulatory approvals process is where I believe there are significant opportunities for compression and overlap, if that was the desire.
Yes.
And then on the back end, what I say the back end, financing and construction, it depends on how you're taking delivery of the project. If it's design, build, operate, transfer, DBOT, that can be compressed on top of some of your regulatory framework. So I view the 10 years as a traditional project delivery. If there were momentum, interest, and money, you could deliver a project, I believe, in the 23-24 timeframe. But I believe that has all the right pieces on it, and there are, and it's less than the time to deliver Carlsbad, which is the poster person for delayed projects. But there's ample time built in. So I think it's reasonable, doable, but I would also characterize the places where there are opportunities for compression if that were the desire.
So I think we could just put some notes in there that signify that this is an area where we believe time could be compressed if there's a desire to, and instead of the development of multiple timelines for a project.
I agree.
Because that always gets confusing if you start throwing up too many slides. Mm-hmm. So I would recommend just making notes on this timeline to your point. But, you know, on the other end of that, it could go much longer than 10 years if there's no desire.
Right. And so my concern about the 10-year time frame is that it could unintentionally lead to complacency, like we have plenty of time to do this thing, or, you know, it's not a strategy that can be deployed in response to changing conditions.
So one of the things that I had discussed with Tom before is if there's a need by mid-20s to have a project up and running, it is imperative that we get started today to get it in place, because this is what it really looks like, and this isn't really dragging your feet.
No.
And so we can't take the next 3 to 5 years evaluating everything under the sun, right? And so that's kind of the message that I want this group to be sending is we have to follow up on this group's recommendations and take the next step.
Right, because it takes a while.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Yeah. And I'm happy to put together a shorter timeline. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Are there other, for most of you, it's the first time you've gotten an opportunity to see this. But for those of you who have been around projects like this before, are there any things that jump out at you that say, hey, you forgot this, or you need to include something that just is totally missing from the timeline? Yes, sir.
I've been involved, fortunately, in the management end of a number of large infrastructure projects. The biggest single reduction in time opportunity, in my opinion, is traditionally we design and then we review, and then we design and then we review. There's, in a design-build project, one of the great advantages is you have designers and contractors working together. If this group could encourage designers and contractors and regulatory people to be a part of an overall concept team, so that instead of it being a consecutive process, it becomes to be somewhat commensurate process.
Mm-hmm.
And the cost doesn't change a whole heck of a lot, but the time, and ultimately the cost goes dramatically higher because of time, if for no other reason.
Yeah.
So somehow pushing design, build, if that's what this is about, design, build, regulatory approval to be all part of a project team and work together could dramatically shut the time frame, in my opinion.
I do not disagree with you at all. I think.
How do we achieve that?
Well, it's the will of whoever's doing it, right? I mean, I
have had a number of projects where the community who wanted the project, contractor wanted the project, the architects or engineers, as the case may be, wanted the project, but you could not move the regulatory agencies to come into the team and say, okay, let's review as we go along.
They historically have not wanted to participate as part of the team. When you give me a design, I can tell you if I can approve it. But if I participate in the team, then I'm obligated to approve your design. And so if I'm a regulator, I'm going to be very reluctant to participate in your team because my participation may signify to you my approval. And I want to, as a regulator, I want to hold my approval to the end of your design. And so that will, I think, always be a challenge. The thing that you can do as the project team is feed the regulator as much information as you can, preliminary design, not wait till your totally final design and give it to them. And that's an approach we've used in the past, and that was the most expeditious. Other than the only other thing you can do is build at risk.
Well, yeah, on the assumption that it's easier to get forgiven than to get approved. That's always expensive risk.
Well, what you do if you build at risk is you over-design.
Absolutely.
You make sure that it can't fail, that it cannot be not approved, and it's very expensive to do that.
I concur totally with what you said, sir, and I don't know. But when you have a design-build team, the contractor and the engineer are facing exactly that same problem because the contractor is saying, okay, I can build that for $1, and he or they or it is taking one heck of a big chance that when that final design document hits the floor, it hasn't dramatically changed.
Yeah,
okay.
It's a challenge. I totally agree with you.
Position, I understand, but it's no different position than the contractor or the engineer who are at a lot more financial risk than the regulatory agency.
Everybody takes a risk. Some it's financial, and others it's just what their charter is. A regulatory agency has a charter that they have to follow, and I mean we have to appreciate that as the people on the other end of it. So, I don't disagree, and I agree with Chuck. There's opportunities if if there's a need for the product, there's opportunities to maybe shorten this by 3 years. Still 7 years.
Yeah.
And so the point that this group makes is the same, I believe, that if we look out in the future and we look at our projections and what Pam put together for us and look at that and say, there's a need, then we need to continue to move this forward. Yeah, Brian?
I just wanted to compliment you guys for putting this together. This is a really, really good first step. And, they always say to start with the end in mind, and, here we are doing that. So that's to be commended, I think. As I was looking at this, and I don't think this necessarily needs to be in here, but something that we need to keep in mind is input and buy-in from local stakeholders.
Oh.
We've talked a lot about that in our group last time. I'm not sure where that would fit in. It would probably be throughout the process. But I think everyone here knows.
I think it's part of what we've talked about is in concept phase before we even move it.
Yeah.
Because what we've talked about is part of our prioritization is the input from the local community. Yeah. And we can't move anything forward without their buy-in, right?
Well, that was my comment that I was just going to make, is that we could have all of this and everything could go smoothly, but if we don't have that buy-in from those that are going to be closest to this and most affected, it's not going anywhere. And I think we all know that, and I don't even know if that needs to be incorporated in here. That's up to you guys. But it's just a thought to throw out there.
Yeah, thank you. That absolutely needs to be in there because it's so critical to anything moving forward.
And it needs to happen this year.
Yeah, it's something that this committee can start focusing on now. Yeah.
Wade?
Yeah, if you're thinking that you're going to resolve buy-in from the local community as to how they feel about it or who owns the water, you may be a little bit ambitious in thinking you can get that done in a year.
I totally understand, Wade. How about 10 years? Yeah, I think to your point is that spans over multiple years, and so it starts early, and maybe that is the first 2, 3, 4 years even, and so I think that's a very good point. That I don't want to be too rose-colored glasses to believe that we can get that accomplished in a year.
That was the thing that really pushed the Carlsbad plant back, was all the lawsuits they had to deal with.
I would prefer if we didn't get into lawsuits and we could head them off prior to starting activities, but you never know. You just never know. Any other feedback, Wade?
No, I think we just have to work our way through this and see what happens. It's very difficult to speak for all the entities and interests down here in this area. The Agriculture Water Coalition Group, they have some reservations about what's being proposed.
I totally understand their apprehension. We'll just have to see what we can do to curb that apprehension some, and that's where we'll need, your assistance and your feedback. Any other comments? Please, if you have comments, send them to Zach, send them to me or Philip. We definitely look forward to and appreciate the feedback. We want to get this as good as possible. I mean, it's a timeline, as we all know, is never a finished product, because it's always changing. But I want to get something out for the entire WAC committee so that we can share with them this is what we're looking at. So,
Scott, under financing, P3 with a question mark. What did you mean by that? What's the question mark?
P3 is...
It goes forward to anybody?
Just how the financing works. Is it a public-private
partnership?
Okay.
And we don't know. So that's why there's a question mark there.
So we might...
I can take that off completely before we go to the GWAC group, but I want at least this group to see and comment on it. I don't know for sure how the financing is going to work. I'm not sure that it's up to us. That's why we have a financing committee.
Yeah.
But my understanding is the finance committee has been asked to look at information of different methods and mechanisms and ways to finance big projects like this and just get a big picture idea. So they're working pretty.
Right now.
Yeah.
They were looking.
Bless you.
What's going on in Texas, right? With that big thing they got there for water project.
Yeah. So they're looking at examples from other states, but I don't know to what extent those examples will be considered seriously to be reiterated in Arizona. I think they're just more like, these are idea generation opportunities. Like, let's just brainstorm and see what else we can bring to the table. I think it's very preliminary.
Yeah, multiple methods of financing projects. I don't know. It may depend where it's at and all kinds of other factors before you land on what is the methodology that is the best approach for financing. So just a couple of things that Philip and I talked about is when you're starting to get into, we have electric power contracts, chemical contracts. When you're starting to get to the end where you're going to start construction, you need to start looking at what are the power resources available for the location of the plant. I mean, that can be a big cost if you're going to have to move transmission lines to be able to power up a facility, and what is the availability of the chemicals that you're going to need for the operation of the plant, because transportation costs for some of these bulk chemicals can really impact your cost per unit when you get to production costs. So that's why we kind of have that on this end, so we don't make sure we're making an informed, conscious decision on what that unit cost is going to be before you go out with you're trying to sell your product.
So would this be something we could show the GWAC at the next meeting?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Bob, do you think there should be a finance component timeline for like initial things? Like you have the initial financing, it's a year, kind of the idea after.
So initial financing to us, Scott, was we needed enough money to start engineering design work. I mean, that's good engineering costs a lot of money, as you well know. And so I don't want to minimize how much money that is. I mean, because that can easily be, $250,000. But if you're talking about a potential plant, if you were building from ground up, that could be $500 million to $1 billion. That's a pretty small amount, and that's why we kind of said the initial financing. Let us do the design, get some environmental reviews, and then we'll know what it is that the project needs are.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
A moment ago you said, if I heard you correctly, if there's a need, it'll be easier to get people to coalesce around such a project. Is there any question in the minds of anyone that there is a need?
Depends on who you talk to, I guess. And
well,
that's,
I agree with that, but if you go talk at the coffee shops, Either react, you get just pull my toilet flushes, I take a shower in the morning, I don't know what the heck everybody's talking about water problem. If there is no need, or if there is no perceived need, getting that community to coalesce around anything is horribly difficult. So that to me needs to be somebody, and I would think it would be the department that would conclude there is a need and a substantial need. And you're talking 325,000 acre feet of overdraft in a state that has taken the position we're not going to have any overdrafts. That's pretty difficult.
I don't disagree. I mean, that was part of the discussion of the first meeting of the Governor's Water Augmentation Council. Is there a need, and how do we communicate that? If there is indeed a need, how is that communicated to all of Arizona? And so if you look at the department's website today compared to the department's website a year ago, much easier to find information. I won't say better information, because I think the information the department had on their website always was there, but it's much more user-friendly to get to, kind of more in your face. Here's what's going on in the state. Here's the issues and challenges that we face going forward. So Doug's group in communications, I think, is doing an excellent job of changing that communication strategy and making that much more focus area of the department to convey the messaging. So it depends on where you sit in the state. And some people will always think, as long as I have water running out of my tap, why do I increase my taxes, my bills, my anything to fund for future? Maybe I look at it and say, I'm not going to live till there's an issue. So why do I need to pay for it?
Well, to me, that schedule, that timeline, the thing on the left, the little blue strip, needs to be expanded to say determination that the public determination there's a need. Because until there's a need established, it's going to be awful hard to get anybody to move.
Well, that's going to be really difficult, because, I mean, you can see just within the last year, at this time last year, everything in the news was going on about Lake Mead and shortages and things like that. And now, after this winter that we've had and continue to have, a lot of those articles are kind of fading away, and a lot of that. So that's what Bob was talking about in the beginning, that we're still in the desert, we still need to show the need, but just what's happened lately has kind of skewed some of the opinions. That's always going to be a really big challenge with this whole process. Is, when it becomes critical is when it really will move fast. But if it rains for a couple of months or it snows, then all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, okay, we're all right then. Well, we realize that it's not all right, but it's just getting that word out that it still needs to be there.
You still got, according to this schedule, 10 years out in front of you when everybody says, okay, there's a need, let's do something.
Well,
10 years.
I think we always face that, and sometimes you don't get consensus. You get a majority, and that's where we're focused, right? Is get people to understand, and it's not. I don't think it's that difficult when you live in the desert to get enough people on board to move the rock forward. And so I don't discount what you're saying. It's always going to be a challenge, but we're like 4 minutes from the end of our meeting. So the last thing that Zach has put up here is the spreadsheet that we developed as a group a few weeks ago, and we as a group will continue to populate the boxes, and we will use this spreadsheet and the population of each of the boxes to assist us in the prioritization of what is the area of focus for us to move forward. So my perspective to use this spreadsheet is that at the end of the day, they will align with what we believe as a group is what we think is our best place to start. And so we'll populate each one of these with as much information as we can. You see on the top, it's sustainability of the supply. Big challenge is disposal issues for the waste stream. Oh, wow, that's easier to read. But I was testing my LASIK after 5 years, and it was still functioning.
It was doing well.
Yeah, it was still good. Land availability and cost, location issues, and that location issues really goes to who's the end user going to be, and what's it going to take to get it to the end user, from infrastructure to conveyance, cost of capital and O&M. Local issues are what we've been talking about, and last but not least, regulatory and legal issues, hurdles, whatever you want to call them, that we will have to face as we move the project forward. So each one of these areas, our group will work on the population of them, and once we get them all populated, we'll be ready to share it with the entire GWAC committee. So you see on the left-hand side are the areas of focus, and it comes from a report that CAP was kind enough to share with us. The West Salt River Valley is what's been called for years the Buckeye waterlogged area, Winslow Loop area, up around the Colorado River. These are all poor quality groundwater areas, 2,000 to 10,000 ppm TDS. Gila Bend area that has its own challenges. All of these areas have their own challenges. Picacho, Eloy, Wilcox, Playa area, and then Yuma non-groundwater area through the bypass drain, and then the brackish groundwater mound that resides in Yuma. And I will tell you that just we as a group have talked about each one of them. Each one of them poses their own unique challenges. And going back to Wade's point earlier, if you think you can get through any of the public comments and public input in a year, I think you're right on, Wade, that that would definitely be amazing if you could do that. Are there any comments on that spreadsheet that we put together? Hearing none. So are there any other questions or comments from the committee? Any other from anyone else?
I have a hard copy of this, if anyone would like one. It's in the corner over there.
I will work with Zach and put together some dates for our next committee meeting. So you'll see a note from Zach in the not too distant future, so we don't all whip out our calendars and try to fumble through our smartphones. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was enticed to play with Audubon, and I was just curious if any on this list are at a point in your early deliberations that could be considered to maybe start with a house.
Oh no, we're not we're nowhere near that part yet.
Okay.
So we're, and we as a group will discuss this further. What our expectations are and what our deliverables are. What I conveyed to Tom and the rest of the GWAC group at our last meeting was, I think our our expectations as a group is to work through this list and to put something together by the end of the year that says this is where we think we need to start. And even that will be a challenge. So, anything else? All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.